Welcome to the Vancouver UFO Meetup Group. This is March the 14th, 2021. Our guest is Paul Elder. I'll just read our introduction here. The title of his talk today is called Remote Viewing ETs and Hidden Alien Bases on Planet Earth, the Real Story. Ever heard of remote viewing or Project Stargate? Paul Elder hadn't, at least not until a series of near-death experiences opened a psychic doorway for him, and his life was forever changed. From humble beginnings as a farm boy in the Canadian prairies, Paul has become something of an anomaly. Now he finds himself holding company with the world's best remote viewers, former Pentagon directors, and top secret military intelligence officers. The story reads like fiction, but it is fact. Author of the acclaimed book, Eyes of an Angel, Paul Elder is a former CTV News reporter and mayor of a Saskatchewan City. He's also a survivor of 3 near-death experiences: a drowning at the age of 12, a car accident at 17, and a heart attack at the age of 41. Following his near-death encounters, Elder's life was further rocked by a series of spontaneous out-of-body experiences which would lead him to a life of psychic intrigue that he could not even have imagined. Due in part to his many extraordinary excursions while participating in consciousness exploration programs at the world-famous Monroe Institute of Virginia, Elder was introduced to some mysterious people involved in paranormal research, some at high levels of security within US government's top secret military intelligence psychic spying program known as Project Stargate. As a result of these connections, Elder began extensive training with several of the original Army intelligence remote viewing officers employed in the previously top secret unit. In recognition of his abilities in remote viewing, Elder was recruited a number of years ago as an instructor at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, where he specializes in teaching remote viewing classes with former Army officer Skip Atwater. Atwater, now retired, was formerly known as Captain Fred Atwater, none other than the original recruiting and operations officer for Project Stargate. So welcome, Paul Elder. Good to have you join us.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for putting this together. And hi, folks.
I should mention too, I first met Paul in 2006. He gave a remote viewing workshop here, and again in 2009. So I met him personally. Was really impressed with that session. So wanted you to have you join us. So thanks for coming.
Okay, my pleasure. I think this is, well, and I think you can all agree that this is probably, notwithstanding the insanity that we have going on right now on our planet, that this is a pretty cool time to be alive. And the reason I say that is because I think that we are just years away from the landing on the lawn, like full disclosure. To sort of back up this process, or what I'm going to tell you, I should say that Brian read some of the preamble there. I've done a lot of things in my life. As Brian mentioned, I'm a former news reporter and a former politician. And when I was the mayor of this little city called Swift Current, Saskatchewan, for a whole bunch of years. And so got to engage in a whole bunch of different things. But one of the most significant things about my journey, if you will, were the near-death experiences. When I was 12 years old, I had this amazing experience. I drowned in the middle of a pond in Saskatchewan and had this remarkable experience. But when you're 12 and weird stuff happens, you go, that was weird, and you go on with life. And then a few years later, I didn't realize at that time how that had changed me in significant ways. I could see things in my mind, and I came from, I should give you a little bit of background. I come from here's a redundant statement, a large Catholic family. My mother had 8 girls in a row and then figure out what was happening. She changed the dial and had 3 boys, and I'm the 10th out of 11 kids. And one of the things that, when you grow up with nothing, literally in the middle of nowhere, you're not apt to, lend yourself to believing any crap. you know, and so we were complete realists and we grew up that way. But when I was 12 and I had this amazing incident happen, and I couldn't swim a lick, and I just want to back up and tell you a little bit about it because I think it's relevant, and it might surprise some of you. One of the things that everyone may have this notion of how horrible it would be to drown, right? We've all been, you know, in ponds and in lakes and in the ocean, perhaps, you know, swimming pools. At some point in our life, when you're learning and you take in a big gulp of water, and there's instant panic, and we're fighting for air, and you know, that kind of thing. Well, I can tell you one thing that really, really surprised me. I couldn't swim a lick, and my little brother and I and our two cousins from the big city of Edmonton were chasing around. This is, you know, when I was 12 years old, a long time ago, and we ended up finding this pond, or dugout, we used to call them in Saskatchewan. And one of the neighbor's kids had left a raft abandoned there. And so, of course, you know, even though we couldn't swim, next thing we know, we're bobbing up and down on this raft in the middle of this big pool of water, about 15 feet deep. And my older cousin, who thought it would be a lot of fun, considering that, you know, my little brother and I were terrified of water and couldn't swim, that it'd be a lot of fun to rock the raft. And Murphy's Law would dictate that I was the one who fell in, and I was, and you know, and it was so amazing because I didn't even have the, you know, the presence of mind. It was instant panic, and I never had the presence of mind to even dog paddle. I just sank to the bottom of this pond, and as I mentioned, it was about 15 feet deep, and my feet, I felt the mud, and I must have kicked or something, pushed myself up and floated to the top again, and the water became brighter, and I could, you know, I'm not sure if my head came through the top of the water, and then I sank again. Excuse me. And then the most amazing thing happened. And remember, I was talking about how, you know, everybody's freaked out about drowning and how horrible that would be. Well, guess what? When all the air goes out and the water comes in, there's absolutely no struggle. No problem at all. Your lungs don't want for anything. There is no strife. And in fact, it amazed me that I wasn't concerned. It was just, and all that happens because, and it makes sense because we spent the first 9 months of our lives in a liquid environment, right? So our lungs might be moving, or my lungs were moving, and the water is going in and going out. Right? But there's absolutely no discomfort. It was totally amazing. And you know, all that happens eventually, you know, with the lack of oxygen, is you go to sleep and you shift into unconsciousness, and that's what happened. And the next thing I know, I'm not sure how long I was unconscious, but at some point I clicked back in, and I'm still in the water, but everything had changed. I can still feel I'm in the mud now with my knees and my hands. But I'm surrounded by this bubble of energy, and every color of the rainbow was inside this energetic bubble. And I'm thinking, and I could feel, and all of the colors were just vibrating. All of the colors, I could feel the difference. Green felt different than blue, and blue felt different than orange, and so on. And I'll never forget running my hands through the water going, that's amazing. I didn't know you could feel colors. It was so cool. But I began to think, hey, this is weird. Am I dead? Or am I dying? And when I thought about that, I had no perspective on, you know, I didn't even know anybody who died when I was 12 years old. And so the only reference I had to dying was a few weeks earlier, I had read the book Tom Sawyer. And in this book, Tom is believed to have drowned in the Mississippi, and he returns home for his own funeral kind of thing. or memorial service in the back of the church, looking in the back, wondering who they're burying. Well, I thought about that, and the next instant, I flew out of the water in an out-of-body state, and I'm floating over top of the choir loft in the back of our Catholic church out in the country, big church, and there's not a soul in there, and I'm floating above the pews in the choir loft in the second floor, looking down over this big church and thinking, oh my God, Tom Sawyer didn't fly, I'm flying, right? It was just the coolest thing. And I discovered that I could, just with thought, I could fly and move over, and sometimes I floated right over top of the end of where the choir loft was, looking down 16 feet and so on and so forth. And then at some point, I was just amazed, thinking, if this is dead, this is cool. But where is everybody? And all of a sudden, in the next instant, boom, I am back on the shore of this pond. And my cousin has me upside down, and he's pumping the water out of me. And my face is bouncing in the mud. And, so I probably threw up for a couple of minutes and get all the water out. And we're sitting there, the four of us, eyes this wide, amazed at what had just happened. I was in the water apparently for 6 or 7 minutes. And so we made an oath, because we'd get in big trouble if anybody found out about this. So we made this oath that we're never going to tell another soul. And then we walked really slow. We were about 1.5 miles from our house on the farm, so that our clothes would dry. And when we got home, it was interesting. And I'm telling my cousin, who saved my life, telling my cousin that about what happened. And he was like, Tom Sawyer, Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead. So he didn't really relate to what I was telling him. And we got home, and it was interesting. We weren't home for about 10 minutes, and I'm staying out in the yard, staying away. And pretty soon I hear the kayang in German coming out of our farmhouse. And 2 kids got a good whipping on that day, and I was one of them. That'll teach me to die, right? But now, having said that, the reason I told you that is because I've had, in the read up until that book came out, that's 15 years ago now. I'd had 3 near-death experiences, and now it is 5, and I can't get it right. So one of these days, just had this amazing process, but probably one of the most profound was when I was, in politics in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and playing old-timers hockey, and I had a heart attack in the middle of a hockey game, and died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And if any of you have experienced the paddles, I had this amazing, amazing experience. I am heading home. I felt like the movie E.T., where the little guy is, wakes up, in a coffin-like thing, and I felt I'm going home, and I'm streaking towards this light, and all of a sudden there's this explosion, boom, and I'm in the emergency room in the hospital, and they had just hammered me with the paddles. That freaking hurts a whole lot. Scorches your soul, I think. But what happened after that, and this is where this is relevant. As I mentioned earlier on, when I was 12 years old and had this experience, after that, it sort of changed so many things. I could see things in my mind sometimes. And the rest of my family knew about it, and they can still vouch for that today. Like, I have 8 sisters, and if somebody lost something, they would say, well, ask Paul, because I had, wherever this came from, I have no idea. But I didn't attach any spiritual significance to it. I could see things in my mind, so I could say, like, oh, all right. Okay, no worries. What happened after that is I began to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences. This dying in the hospital, of a heart attack, really opened the doorways to a whole bunch of things. And the next thing I knew, and I had heard about out of body experiences. I read a book 10 years before that, in 1981, I think, by a guy named Bob Monroe. And he had written this book called Journeys Out of the Body. And Bob was, well, anyway, this book became something of a international hit. He's attributed with creating the term out-of-body experience, much like Raymond Moody, who had near-death, created near-death experience, or that reference. And I read the book, I'd heard about it, and read the book from cover to cover, and thought, well, this is interesting, but this guy's a nut job, and took it back, and enough. 10 years later, I find myself, after this heart attack, I find myself floating at the ceiling of my bedroom going, holy crap, Bob Monroe wasn't crazy. This was real, it was happening. So longer story short, is I became obsessed with this. I knew that I had to find out about the Monroe Institute. They had programs where the public or people from around the world came to this facility in Virginia, where you could study your own consciousness and learn about out-of-body experiences and consciousness in general. And I thought, I've got to go there. And so I did. And I fell in love with the place because it was, it was amazing. They were opening the door to explore your own consciousness. And they had developed, Bob Monroe had developed, and this is an actual patented process, had developed a technology that involved stereo speakers or headphones, if you will, that could create a frequency in the brain that would carry us into theta range of consciousness, sleep states, dream states, while we were fully awake. So this process could allow us to move into dream states virtually, while our minds were fully awake, body asleep, mind awake. And they actually received a patent for it because this could actually proven to alter brain waves, and people were having remarkable experiences in this process. And I thought it was just, an amazing, amazing process. So I got involved in it, and I went back several times for these 6-day programs that they had in Virginia. And I got to go into what they call the isolation chamber, or the lab, and get hooked up with the diodes and measuring brain waves and so on and so forth. And when I was in the some of the things that I experienced and some of the things that I shared with them got someone's attention. And one day I was introduced, to a number of people, introduced to a guy named Dale Graff. And this guy was a former Pentagon director of this top secret program called Stargate. And he told me about it, or they told me about this process. And thought I might have some abilities in it. And so longer story short is I spent a fair amount of time learning and practicing with various members of this former top secret unit. And I thought at first, it's a bunch of crap. I thought, well, hey, I might have been born in Saskatchewan, but it wasn't yesterday, And so anyway, given all of the training and so on and so forth, and I found out about the entire process of remote viewing, or what they call remote viewing, and that it really worked, and that it could be used for amazing things. We can basically, the reality of who we are as conscious beings, we have the ability, or we are connected to all consciousness, or all information basically in the universe, if you will. And so that started a long history. Now, I have to throw in something here because you have to realize I was the mayor of a fundamental Christian community, Swift Current, Saskatchewan, about 18,000 people, 80% Mennonite, right? Now, they'd, excuse me, they'd heard about near-death experiences, but that ain't Jesus, right? And if you're talking about out-of-body experiences, wow, you are the devil, right? I shouldn't say that in that sense, but it was, kind of the background of it. So wonderful, wonderful place, wonderful, wonderful people, and very kind, law-abiding, kind of a wonderful place to be in. And but things of spirituality and so on and so forth weren't perhaps, it would not to be trusted. All right. And so I never talked about it. I'm kind of living a double life. And I never talked about it, in our little city out there, and especially not around election time, and managed to be reelected like 6 times. So
Wow.
yeah. So anyway, but I can tell you one thing: I truly wish that everybody on this planet had a near-death experience. We would have an entirely different world than we're living in right now. All right. So, but to get back to, and you'll have to keep me up to date on the time, Brian, or the timing.
Sure. Another thing I can. Okay.
So it seemed like a really strange process, and strange way to live in my life. Whoops. And so I'm living this double life. By day, I'm the mayor of a fundamental Christian community, and at night, I'm doing intelligence work for, looking for missing people, sometimes, helping to track down bad people, stuff like that. All right. Now, I should mention this because, I'm Canadian, I'm not American, but I did, so I've never ever worked for Stargate. All right. However, I've helped out with various intelligence services in helping find missing people, hostages, stuff like that. Okay, so given all of that, I was recruited or hired as a trainer, a remote viewing trainer at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, working with this guy named Skip Atwater. And I hadn't a clue who this Skip Atwater was. To me, it was just a very kind, mild-mannered guy with a goatee. And he was the voice in the headphones. He was the research director at the Monroe Institute in Virginia. And he was the voice that would come over my headphones when I'm in a deep altered state inside the isolation chamber, coming on and saying, "Tell us what's happening," and jolting me out of my, and I discovered or found out later on that he was none other than he was the former manager of Stargate at the Fort Meade facility in Maryland. So he was the manager of this top secret program. And when he retired from the Army, Bob Monroe hired him at the Institute in Virginia. And so where that whole connection and process came from. And I, it blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's very cool. But I want to say something because in terms of reality, when we talk about things, and this is sort of a common thing, when we talk about, and it is for me too, when we talk about things like, you say something like, military intelligence, that's like the biggest oxymoron in the world, right? Would you trust that? But what I want to say is that regardless, they ran this program, this top secret program, for 23 years and had numerous men and women going through it, mostly from the armed forces, that were trained to operate as agents in the sense of psychic agents, if you will, to track down, find missing people, hostages, all of those things. There were no limitations, no limits on where one can go with the mind. But the whole notion of military intelligence kind of strikes us as an oddity. And I can say one thing for sure, that knowing all of these people that are involved in this process, regardless of what the generals or the Joint Chiefs of Staff had in mind for this program, the people that were doing it, the remote viewers, the guys and gals who worked every day in this process, you could not find more spiritual people on this planet, because they saw it from a much larger perspective. They had a job to do, find hostages, find this, blah, blah, blah. But they saw it from a much larger spiritual perspective. And knowing that, and even the Pentagon director, Dale Graff, remarkably spiritual and attuned, to the entire, this entire process of exploring our own consciousness. So that led to, and as I said, that's the preamble, that's the opening story. That's how I got involved in this process, and was the trainer at the Monroe Institute teaching remote viewing, along with the former manager of Stargate for 10 years. And so over that period of time, had my mind opened up to a whole bunch of amazing things. Had a couple of near-death experiences since then, and which completely brings everything together, in my mind. People have asked me, considering, because I've had 5 near-death experiences now, and people have asked, excuse me, and said, well, why do you think this is happening to you? And I think the reality is, like, I can't get it right, but I think the reality is that when you show a 12-year-old that there's no such thing as death, that is dangerous. Because after that, everything is open. It's like, hey, and you do dumb stuff, like in Saskatchewan, we'd say, the precursor for a near-death experience is, here, hold my beer, watch this, right? We would, but when you know that there's no such thing as death, I don't know if that encourages you to be an idiot or to do stuff that, could get you killed. Because in my mind, when I was a kid, I was thinking, what's the worst that could happen? I get killed? No. So, it sort of opens you up to doing a whole bunch of, here, hold my beer stuff, right? So over the years, I've become involved in a whole bunch of amazing things, and I'm so excited all the time to share this with people, because some things I can't share, but something, because to me this is so remarkable. We are connected to everything in the universe. We are connected to all knowledge through our minds, through the reality of who we are. And in going through this process, there is, we have avenues to everything. Now, the topic that you're interested in is in, excuse me, extraterrestrials or other conscious beings in the universe. Well, there's some interesting, and you probably, if you've done this, you've all heard about this before. And I want to just sort of give you a quick background of a couple of things here. That you're familiar with a fellow named Paul Hellyer?
Yeah, we booked a talk with him in the fall, but we didn't get him on. The computer didn't work. But yeah, I know Paul. Well, I've emailed with him over the years as well.
Oh, okay, too bad. Paul was pretty amazing. He was like the defense minister in Canada and worked in that for like 20 years or whatever, a number of years ago. And where this sort of came out for me and really, kind of, popped into my existence, a fellow named Stephen Hawking You remember him, the guy who was in the wheelchair, who
Yeah,
was
yeah.
deemed to be, the next Einstein. And he had made what I considered a really dumb statement. In a documentary, Hawking said, if there was such a thing as intelligence elsewhere in the universe, and if they could somehow overcome this problem of traveling faster than the speed of light through time and millions of years or light years of travel to be here, that we would be at risk, that we should be very afraid because they would rape our planet of its resources and we would be like ants to them. That was a Hawking thing. Excuse me. Well, a couple of weeks after that documentary came out, Paul Hallier was speaking at the Ottawa Press Club or something, I think. And somebody, one of the reporters, asked him about it. And Paul unleashed on him, basically said he couldn't believe that, you know, such a dumb statement, but I don't want to quote Paul, but, he said, it's not a matter that we have to go and find them or that they're somewhere in the universe. They're here. They've been here for thousands of years. And he said, where do you think we're getting most of the technology we have today? That's the truth. There has been over, as we all know, over the last 25, 30 years, there's been this explosion of technology and understanding. Can you imagine? I mean, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I could not have imagined the world that we're in today. I can look at my phone and see where there's a parking spot in front of the bank when I'm going downtown. That phone in your pocket has 4,000 times the computing power of the computer that put man on the moon. Where is this coming from? Well, Paul was right. It's coming from those areas of consciousness from extraterrestrials and so on and so forth. But so I want to just harken back to a couple of things now because, I'm going to run out of time. In this process of learning about consciousness, and I love the Monroe Institute, so I would go there and attend programs in addition to the ones that I was teaching in remote viewing and so on and so forth. And this is probably, oh my gosh, 20 years ago. We had finished, it was in the evening, we had finished a session, a hemisync session, they call it. This process that Bob had developed and patented is called hemispheric synchronization, or hemisync for short. And we had just finished one of those, and it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and had come back out of this session really kind of thinking, oh gee, it's 9 o'clock, 9:30. I wonder if I should go downstairs, have a snack, or just, maybe I'll just turn over and go to sleep. And while I'm laying there, still in this mind awake, body asleep format, if you will, while I'm laying there, drifting in and out, all of a sudden, I was in a room, looking out of a window over top of, it seemed like about 40,000 feet high, over top of a large city somewhere at night. I'm looking down over this massive field of lights below me and everything else, and the realization hit me, and I'm like, oh my God, I am in a spaceship. And I didn't see them or look at them, but there were two little guys that were showing me this. All right. And it really surprised me because this was massive. And I thought, I had this notion that, if there were spaceships, you'd probably have to duck to get inside because the grays are just little, And I'm looking around, and this is burnt distinctly into my mind. The walls were light blue in color, and there were panels as I'm, looking past this huge window or portal looking down over things. And I look around in this room thinking, oh my God, I'm in a spaceship. And there were what I would have thought were to be like computer monitors or big monitor things on the wall built in and stuff like that. As as I'm looking through here going, oh my God, I am in a spaceship. And then boom, I'm back in my body. And I was just blown away. I thought, Jesus, that was real. Didn't look at these guys, didn't talk to them, but they were clearly showing me this, whatever it was. So I head home back to Saskatchewan, back to Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and perplexed about this, thinking, that's real, right? And so I end up, about a month and a half later, in the middle of the night, I had been out of body somewhere. And I became aware as I'm flying back or zooming back into my body, inside my house, right, in bed, and with a big jolt, and just boom, I'm back in my body, and I knew somebody followed me. And I was freaked out, and I couldn't figure, why am I freaked out? But I'm laying there in my bed, and I cannot move. And I know somebody has followed me. There's someone in my house, and I'm trying to turn, and I turn to the side like this as I'm laying down, and about 7 or 8 feet away, there he was. There's a little ET, a gray, standing in my bedroom with one hand on, an armoire with a television in it, and I can't move. I wanted to scream or say something or yell, and I cannot move. And this little guy just looks at me and goes, and he turned and walked through the wall, disappeared. And then immediately I can get up and I go, no, come back, because I would want this more than anything, right? I mean, I ran into the other room, into the living room, and I'm like, no, come back. And, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm out on the front step of my house, all right, yelling at the sky, saying, no, come back. It's just, glad none of the neighbors saw that. But one of the things that it just was so, that this was an ET, a gray, and he was in my house, all right? And it just blew my mind. But it opened the doorway. So the very next day, I phoned a friend of mine. His name is Whitley Strieber. Maybe you've heard of Whitley. Whitley is
oh yeah, I've seen him in person.
Yeah, a prolific author, and he's probably the ultimate contactee. He wrote several books. Communion was one of them, which was made into a movie. Secret Schools and so on and so forth. So Whitley knows stuff. And so I phoned up Whitley, because I'd interviewed in his radio program before. And I told him about it. I said, what was this? I was absolutely paralyzed. I could not move. I was frightened. And he explained it. And he said, well, what happened from, and this is my memory now from, 20 some years ago. And Whitley was explaining and saying, well, what has happened is over millennia or whatever, over millions of years, the extraterrestrials, grays, etc., develop the ability to increase their vibrations to such a point that they can travel through the universe or whatever. They can be anywhere with just thought, but they've increased their vibrational state so that they can actually pass through solid objects. Right, and the only reason they need the spaceship is for the luggage, right? But they can transport, all right? So, and they're dealing with us all the time, with us Earth beings. But here's the thing, they can't trust us. They can deal with us in 2 ways. They can deal with us in the physical, in which they can't trust us because we are kind of a shoot first, ask questions later, or in an out-of-body state. In an out-of-body state, we are equal, we can't hurt them at all. But in the physical, we can, because they lack any physical, strength. and because of this process of increasing their vibration, so they can pass through, solid objects, etc. And so he's telling me that this, that this has been around for thousands of years, and that we, many of us have, been in contact with extraterrestrials, or, and even when I'm, and after having sort of gone through, and I actually got to do some sort of semi-official kind of remote viewings of extraterrestrials, and given that, I've come to understand a few things about, and that's why I say that I think we're within years of the landing on the lawn, full disclosure. And that's happening more and more all the time. And I'm sure that you're aware of that it's going on. But here's the thing, it's not on our agenda. I think it's on the extraterrestrial agenda. They're the ones that are laying this out. To put that into some kind of perspective, who stands to lose the most, do you think, if ET is real?
I would say the globalists, people want to control the world.
Perhaps, but also fundamental religion. Seriously, because if all of a sudden ET shows up, well, that changes. How is that explained in the perspective of the Catholic Bible and, and the Quran and all of these different religious modes? And yet, that is one of the defining things around our globe, is, fundamental religion. Okay, that changes it. So you have, for instance, you have the Catholic Church, and I was raised Catholic. The Catholic Church is, the Vatican is actually a nation, a sovereign nation. So the Vatican, they know stuff, right? And so when you have, like they did about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the Vatican came out and they said there was a statement made that, and they said something to the effect of, gee, the existence of extraterrestrials wouldn't necessarily be outside of the scope of Catholicism. Well, something's coming, because they're a sovereign nation. They know all about this stuff. So, we're seeing more and more of this, kind of stuff happening. So there seems to be, and well, not seems to be, but there is a controlled dissemination of information that is going on. The right amount or certain amounts of information most people associated with, but most of the governments of the world are familiar with this to some degree, but the American government, British governments, Canadian governments know about it. Perhaps the Americans with Area 51 and, and all of those different processes that they have, and with the technology that they have, are familiar. And we're seeing, and this is probably one of the things that you folks have seen over the last few weeks, there have been, or months, there's been a tremendous amount of information, UFO, ET information declassified. Why do you think that's happening? Because they're getting us
prelude to something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, it's coming. They're getting us ready for it. And any questions?
Yeah, first of all, I mentioned that I read Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe when I was 15. It made a big impact on me. That was part of my early spirituality. Later, I became a Buddhist teacher, and the description of the Devas really fits in with Robert Monroe. So that's been a big impact. But also, you have your website. I forgot to mention at the beginning. You could tell people about your website, a bit about your workshops as well, and then we can do questions and answer, unless you want to talk about that later.
All right. Well, I want to show you, just to finish this off, it's about a 5 or 10 minute. We can do the questions afterwards, like Brian said. I want to show you a bit of a slide presentation.
Yeah.
Now I got to figure out how to do that.
The bottom, it says share screen, the green share screen button.
Yep. Okay.
Do you need sound or is it just slides?
Well, yeah, sound too. So, not from, just slides, right? So I'll just, okay, so to open up about where this came from. This is now a number of years ago, and there are more and more reports of UFOs, across Canada, around the world, and so on and so forth. Out here on Vancouver Island, it's a particular hotspot. It's a hotspot for regular aircraft, commercial aircraft, as well as alien spacecraft, if you will. Strangely enough, whether you realize this or not, Winnipeg, Manitoba is one of the hotspots. Did you know that? They're in the lake area, just to the east of Winnipeg.
Like Grant Cameron, that's when he first cut his teeth in 1975 with the UFO sighting flap at that time.
Yeah.
At the center.
So there's some interesting things, but what I want to show you on this slide thing, this actually, so there's Captain Atwater and I training in remote viewing workshops in Virginia at the Monroe Institute. And one day we got, well, actually, Skip did, got this directive that we can now release information about ET bases on planet Earth. And I'm like, what? So what so what intelligence services released was former top secret remote viewings by the best remote viewers in the world of extraterrestrial bases on this planet. All right. And there were four places. Now I'll guide you along with that if we can get everything figured out here on how it was. And we're like, what? They're releasing this? What's the purpose of that? I mean, it's fine. I would, I'm all for releasing all of it because I'm just very excited about the possibilities and getting this out there, that we are not alone, and you all know that already. So this, just to show you the degree of ability with some of the best remote viewers in the world, remote viewing ET bases on planet Earth. Now, in this particular presentation, and they give us the whole thing, right? This particular presentation, they are suggesting that this guy named Pat Price was at the beginning, at the beginning of Stargate, excuse me, one of the most profound and prolific, remote viewers there was. But they suggested that Pat Price came up with this idea of remote viewing extraterrestrial bases, and there are 4 of them. Well, that's a bit of a not so true. The reality is that the governments already knew this. And so, what in their suggestion, I'll show you this slide and you'll understand what I'm saying. What they're suggesting is that this remote viewer guy came up with these and said, well, hey, there's 4 alien bases out there, and he remote viewed them. Well, the reality is they know exactly what they did is, they supplied the geographical coordinates. So they already knew. So they would say, okay, longitude, latitude, such and such, and the remote viewers are completely double blind, and describe. And you'll find remote viewers describing these places. Now, if I can figure this out, I'm just going to quickly shift to share the screen, and hopefully my audio will continue, and I'll show you some stuff. I'll go through it fairly quickly, and but just to show you how this works.
Ryan, we can ask a question later.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have my mic off. I just say we'll have questions later.
Okay, hang on a second.
Yeah, now it's share screening. It's working.
But you're seeing my whole screen though, aren't you?
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, whole screen.
Okay, hang on a second. I got to get this so that, because I want to show you just the slides.
Click the button that says from the beginning to the left. Right.
Thank you.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, carry on.
All right. So you see these slides here? Okay. It says extraterrestrial bases on planet Earth. All right. And I'll just click through them here. So this is the guy, this is Pat Price. This is the guy who, and here's a quote there from Stansfield Turner, who used to be the director of the CIA back in 1977. And he somehow leaked this to the Chicago Tribune. And so Stansfield Turner says, hey, there's a guy who can see what's going on anywhere in the world through his psychic powers. The remote viewers in the Stanford Research Institute were pretty upset about this, like, holy crap, don't be telling people this, right? Anyway, this is Pat Price, all right? And he can see, so Stansfield Turner, got a bit of attention when he mentioned that, okay? Here is a bit of and I hope it's big enough on your screens. Here is a bit of a historical photograph, or photographs. There's two of them here, okay? This, and I should have bounced back quickly, where the remote viewing program came from is from the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park in California. The CIA back in the early 70s had intelligence that the Soviets had trained psychics who could spy on America. They could literally sit in a dark room in Moscow, describe missile sites, in Oklahoma or wherever it was. And so that created a lot of fear and a lot of concern, because if that was true, then what? So they went to the only place, or one of the few places that were doing psychical research, which was the Stanford Research Institute in California. And so this guy right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor over there. This guy here is Kip Green is his name, okay? And he was the CIA agent who was assigned to talk to these psychic guys in California and at the Stanford Research Institute to see if this was possible. At the Stanford Research Institute were two scientists. Now, these guys were not just some lightweight California psychic freaks kind of thing, excuse me. They were very established scientists named Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. All right, they had actually developed aspects of inventing the laser and uses for the laser. So there's some real science, real physicists going on. So the guy here that's Hal Puthoff. This is Kip Green, which is the CIA agent that came to check it out, and Pat Price, who was at the time was in his 60s. Now this is in the early 70s, around 73, 74, 75. Okay, at that time, so Pat Price grew up in the 50s, and long before television and computers and stuff like that. But he was an amazing remote viewer. Okay. So this other picture here, there's Pat Price again, all right? And here is Russell Targ. That's the other scientist from Stanford Research Institute. And this guy over here, I don't know if you can see that very well on your screen, that is Bob Monroe. How this worked, it's a bit of a historical photograph. How this worked is Bob Monroe, the CIA or intelligence services found out about this hemisync, this patented process that Bob Monroe had created that allowed people to move or alter their brainwaves to move into the place of their mind awake while their body is asleep. And they thought this could be helpful for the remote viewing program, for the remote viewers. What if we let the remote viewers listen to this hemisync stuff? And could we develop special tracks for them, so on and so forth? And so they did a big investigation on Bob Monroe and the Monroe Institute to make sure that they were dependable and trustworthy and real. And they did an analysis of the, of hemisync, the programs that the Institute had, and so on and so forth. And so for a while, they would bring down a busload of these remote viewers from Fort Meade in Maryland, and they would attend a gateway program at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, and which really, really helped them in their remote viewing process. Okay, so all that background is out of the way. All right. So this is sort of a bit of where intentional, slightly intentional misinformation, if you will. The perspective here is they're saying that Pat Price believed that extraterrestrials had established 4 underground UFO bases on planet Earth, and that he remote viewed and provided descriptions of those 4 different locations, right? No, Pat Price didn't come up with those things. Basically what they did is they said, because they knew where they were, and they had the geographical coordinates for it, and said, hey, wonder if a remote viewer could find them, which is always, in intelligence services, are always worried somebody else is going to find out what they're doing. And so to test that, to see if that was possible, they provided the geographical coordinates, and this is what Pat Price came up with. All right. The 4 that they're talking about, and somebody just sort of did a message here. The first one is just in Alaska, is Mount Hayes. And it is just, we were talking about that earlier. It's probably the most prolific one. Mount Hayes is just in the, sort of in the inner panhandle here, but it's part of the very busy commercial aircraft flow. All the way from Washington State to Vancouver and everything else, people going to, say, to China or to Japan, all of the flights head north, because it's actually shorter if they do that and quicker. All right, so they head north and through this, but this is also a huge area of UFO sightings as well, because there is a base right here in Mount Hayes, Alaska. The next one that they identified at that time was Mount Zeal in the Northern Territories in Australia, and Mount Perdido in Spain. And the last one is Enyangani in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So those particular, they had the coordinates for those, and those are the 4 locations. So this is Pat Price. And how Pat Price did most of his remote viewing, he would sit there with a pad and he would draw pictures, but he recorded it, his conversation. So usually it would be Russell Targ would be sitting beside him, asking him questions, all right? And Pat Price would speak into a microphone. And so that's why this is typed out here, because it's a transcript from a recorded session. So in regards to, so all Pat Price has, or is given, is here are geographical coordinates, longitude, latitude, such and such, write those down. Now describe what you get at that location. So Pat Price starts off and he says, after he's relaxed for a while and settling into the state of consciousness, And he says, I see an area filled with what appears to be computer equipment. Instead of reels, equipment has metallic discs, and there's a section filled with equipment. All right, this is right off the top. Okay, and then here's a guy who grew up in the 50s and 60s, before television, in the 40s. All right, before computers, certainly before television, and he made this drawing. Doesn't that look like the schematics for a flash drive or a jump drive? You know, plug it in here kind of thing. And this is the drawing that Pat Price did in 1973, long before there was any such thing like this invented. All right. In relationship to, I mean, they bounced him through these different coordinates. And so in relationship to Mount Perdido, Pat Price's voice on the tape says there are several local units seen in the launch recovery area. Local units have a propulsion system that looks like an artificial electromagnetic field. All around the area, 2-mile circle, there are detectors. And he drew, this is Pat Price's drawing, he drew what he deemed to be a propulsion system for one of the local units. To me, it looks like a globe, you know, on the Earth. But in Pat's mind, this had something to do with how they were operating these spacecraft, right? Now, if you take a look at this up top, one of the sort of the stalwarts, the most Agent 00001, the remote viewer Joe McMonagle, who also works at the Monroe Institute now as well. Joe was probably the most prolific remote viewer at the Institute, or in Stargate. And so just to test this out, and this is, now get this is 10 years later. They gave the same coordinates, hidden coordinates, to Joe McMonagle to see what Joe would come up with. And he has no, you know, they have no knowledge of what the target is. It's just, here's some coordinates, you know, and in Joe's regular day, this is what he did every day, you know. So here are the coordinates. Joe doesn't know, but this is what Joe speaks into the microphone. He's basically inside the isolation chamber, speaking into a microphone. And Joe says there's a desolate open range of mountains or high hills. He has the impression of something buried. He sees tubes, kind of like pipes, oval shapes, contain masses of electronics, a grid work of some kind. All right. And then he draws this kind of picture here. Joe, they typed in, you know, some of the other stuff. Joe says, wherever it is, it's right here in the mountains, and there's some water down here somewhere. All right. Which is the Alaskan Panhandle. Okay. And then Joe draws this. Here's the Earth. He said, this is something that's hooked up to something in space, high technology in space. And he called it a quadrant, protective shield, Earth target location, but something connected, an umbrella connected to outer space. Doesn't know what it is, okay? Draws this picture, says this is underground stuff. There's underground tubes and ovals, or, describing various things here, emission sector, but this is all underground inside a mountain. So then they bounce him to Mount Perdido in Spain, and he draws this. First thing up. Joe is an excellent remote viewer. He won't let himself jump to conclusions saying, you know, it's a spaceship. I would have been like, it's a damn spaceship, you know. But Joe won't do that. He just draws a picture and says, no, I'm getting this image here. There's something that's 120 feet this way and 40 feet high maybe, and just draws that picture of a spaceship, right? Mount Hayes in Alaska. Now here, this is another one of the Stargate remote viewers, a guy named Fern Govan, a fairly prolific remote viewer as well. And given this coordinates, Fern Govan says there's a mess of wires, orderly, oops, let me back up here a bit. Orderly, remote controlled as if in a rocket or propulsion, and the shape is tubular and tapering nose. It looks very much like a missile or space vehicle thing. All right. Back to Joe McMonagle again. This is Mount Zeal in the Northern Territories of Australia. Okay, given those coordinates, different date, so on and so forth. Joe says, gets an underground cave. White dish-shaped storage site, coils, boxes of electronics, can't break it down, electronics and non-electronics, pulsing patterns, and like, oh, it reminds him all of the command control centers he's ever been in. And then Joe said an interesting thing. It's not here, but after the session, and Skip Atwater told me that after Joe got out of the session, out of the isolation chamber, Joe's trying to describe what he was getting, and his description was, he said, it's like, I have no language. I have no words to describe what I'm seeing or what I'm getting here. The technology is beyond me. And Joe, as a reference, he says, it would be like as if I was an Aborigine walking across the desert and I came upon a brand new BMW in the sand. I have no words to describe what I'm seeing. That was Joe's description. All right. And he draws this picture here. Joe is actually a graphic artist, amazing artist. Got a concrete cover on it. It's in the mountains somewhere. And he says, you can go in there, right in there. All right. This is all Joe's drawings. So to give a perspective of the size of stuff in this cave, this is a human, the size of a human, and this is the size of the electronics that are in there, whatever that is. Now we're just about done here. Mount Perdido in Spain. He says, I see sheep. There's a natural cave, wires going in and out like an octopus, kind of a grid, upside down cone, huge spinning upwards, got edges, interconnecting points like a spider web, extremely high frequency. This is what he's sensing telepathically while he's laying in the booth, the isolation chamber. And then Joe draws this. There's an unattended relay, and he's talking about something underneath the ground or in the ground, extremely high frequency, very well camouflaged or hidden, okay? And he draws this as well to give us a perspective of it. If this was the Earth, it's connected to something far out in space, okay? Now, I think the last one here, this is Inyangani in Zimbabwe. And he says, got a singular mountain and a group of high hills. Jungle is close by, very desolate, not even animal life. Sealed rock, black boxes of electronics, power packs, all suitcase size, very advanced, like I've never seen before, okay? And he draws this picture. Something encased in a mountaintop, okay? Now, we're jumping ahead a little bit here. I think this is one of the remote viewers named Mel Riley. Okay. Now remember that all of this stuff, these are super top secret remote viewings that were done years before. All of this stuff is suddenly said, okay, here you can release it. Why are they doing that? Okay. So this session here was many years before, and this is Mel Riley. Mel would just write out and draw his impressions. Get something that's very old, very new, and there are 4 locations. Some are on a seabed, precise observation, and they're about navigational use. But the most important part of this, he's saying, a deep space-borne object, sometimes occupied, sometimes not. And probably can't read the writing here, so I'll just move down to the summary here at the bottom paragraph, and it says, there are some people here. They are thin, unemotional, sort of have a programmed feeling. They are strange and have a purpose and a mission here. They are foreign or semi-isolated and feel unearthly. All right. And he draws this picture, which to me looks like, obviously an alien with a round, large head, and it looks like a church organ or something from out of the past. Okay. So basically, what they did here is they're releasing information on formerly super top secret remote viewings by the best remote viewers in their arsenal, describing extraterrestrial bases on planet Earth. But this isn't just, there aren't just 4. There are, as Joe mentioned earlier on, there are some that are under the sea as well. Okay. Now the question is, here, I'll skip out of here. All right, are we back to normal?
I just want to comment that Richard Dolan believes that Pat Price was murdered. I think he died in 1975. Do you want to comment on that?
I've heard about that. I really don't know. I talked to Hal Putoff, and Hal, it may be possible, but you know, I mean, he's believed that he died of a heart attack. All right, but there were some other, you know, some more compelling things going on right now. That
maybe it's the other side. The Soviets want to shut him up, or someone on the American side.
Right. Well, that was you know, that was part of that story, you know, as a possibility. If you get a chance, there is a Russell Targ, the godfather, if you will, of remote viewing at Stanford Research Institute, put out a movie. Goodness, and I can't remember the name now. Just recently, on the whole process, and they talked about Pat Price, and they talked about, you know, did he really, was he killed? Did he die of natural causes? You know, there's some interesting, you know, very interesting things that come out of that.
It's called Third Eye Spies.
I'm sorry, what's that?
It's called Third Eye Spies, the movie,
Yes,
the
yes.
documentary, yeah.
Yes, yeah, Third Eye Spies, totally. And yeah, very compelling, you know. And
Can you write on the chat, please, the movie name, please?
Yeah, so Paul, you can
name?
carry on.
Oh, are you asking for to write it down, the name of the movie?
Well, someone else can write it. That's fine.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. It's called Third Eye Spies. Really good stuff. You know, it tells the story of the history of the whole program and stuff like that. So some amazing things. I've known Russell Targ for years and years and years. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian, you had a question or?
Oh, no. Did you want to open up for question period yet? How do you feel? Anything else you want to finish with?
Well, there are some interesting things. There's so much to talk about. We could go on for hours, literally. You know, like the moon itself, our moon. All right, we're led to believe by science that the moon somehow, you know, spun off from the Earth, you know, blah blah blah, billions of years ago. A fellow that I used to know, and you're familiar with who Edgar Mitchell is?
Sure, yeah.
Edgar Mitchell was one of the astronauts in the first
Apollo
moon
14,
landing.
yeah.
Well, Edgar saw, you know, and for me, this is exciting because it's so cool. I actually get to meet these people, you know, and, you know, I can't believe they exist, much less that, you know. But Edgar was one of the astronauts, you know, in the orbital capsule, or you know, landing on the moon, and who saw a spaceship go by. And Edgar basically made the comment. I mean, this is so many years ago, saying, "Oh my God, what the hell is that?" You know, and I got to meet also the guy, the Houston ground control manager, who said, "Commander Mitchell, you did not see that." But Edgar let it slip on his way after he got back to Earth. And if you're not familiar who it is, he created Noetic Sciences in California, you know, exploring different aspects of, you know, of consciousness and so on and so forth. Also, always with a view of extraterrestrials as well. So I met Edgar like a whole bunch of years ago, but he died, I think, about 3 years ago. And it's really interesting to get it from a perspective from these folks who've lived it, right? And who know what's going on to some degree. So it's, you know, it was a lot of fun. Other than that, I guess, yeah, we can open it up for questions if you want.